The wind howled low across the desert plain, carrying the dry scent of dust and mesquite. The sun was still climbing when Jacob Turner tightened the worn saddle strap on his horse. 3 days he'd been out here, and the land had given him nothing. No deer, no rabbit, not even a buzzard dumb enough to get close. He spat into the dirt, wiped the sweat off his neck, and scanned the horizon. It was all the same, endless brown hills and red rock ridges that looked like scars torn into the earth. Jacob wasn't out here for sport. He hunted because his stomach gave him no choice. Out in these parts, a man ate what he killed, or he didn't eat at all. He was 40 by his best guess, though the years had stopped counting after the war. His hands were rough, his eyes half-tired, and his soul older than his bones. Folks in town called him quiet. But the truth was simpler. He'd run out of things worth saying. By midday the sun sat cruel and heavy. Heat shimmered like ghosts on the canyon walls. He paused to water his horse when he heard it, something soft, far off and wrong. Not an animal, not the wind. A sound like a moan swallowed by sand. He froze, tilting his head, waiting for it again. There it was, faint, broken, a sound that didn't belong to the desert. Jacob gripped his rifle and followed it. The noise came from the narrow split between 2 rocks, where the air turned cool and shadows hid from the sun. He moved slow, careful, his boots crunching softly on gravel. Then he saw her. She lay half-hidden beneath the thorn bushes, skin caked with dust, clothes torn and stiff with dried blood. Her dark hair clung to her face and her breathing came in shallow gasps. There was an arrow buried deep in her side. The shaft snapped, but the head still inside. Her body was shaking, part fever, part fear. Jacob stood still, rifle in hand, trying to decide what kind of ghost he was looking at. He knew that look, the color of her skin, the beaded fringe on her buckskin dress. Apache, one of the people the settlers feared and hated. He'd fought their kind once, back when he was paid to, back when killing had a name that sounded like duty. Every thought in his head told him to walk away. But his boots didn't move. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and wild. When she saw him, she tried to reach for something at her belt. A knife. Maybe, but her hand fell back weakly. She whispered something he couldn't understand, then closed her eyes again. Jacob lowered his rifle, swore under his breath, and knelt beside her. The arrow wound was deep, the flesh hot with infection. He'd seen enough soldiers die to know she didn't have long. He should have left her, let the desert take her, same as it took everyone else. But he didn't. He tore a strip from his sleeve and pressed it to the wound, trying to slow the bleeding. Her breathing hitched in pain, but she didn't cry out. She just clenched her jaw and kept living through it, the way only someone who's already lost everything could. "I ain't here to hurt you," he muttered, not sure if she could hear. "You'll die out here if I leave you." Her eyelids flickered, and for a moment he thought she might answer. Then her head fell to the side, and her breath grew faint again. Jacob looked out toward the horizon, the long, empty stretch back to town, back to silence. He thought of the sheriff's words, the ones he'd heard 100 times before. "You see an Apache, you put him down. Mercy gets a man killed." He sighed, shoulders heavy, and stared at her again. She was barely more than skin and bone, but there was something in her face, a kind of strength that refused to die quiet. Maybe that's what made him do it. Maybe that's what made him break his own rules. He lifted her carefully into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, the heat from her fever burning against his chest. His horse stamped nervously, sensing trouble, but Jacob calmed her with a quiet word and laid the woman gently across the saddle. The ride back was long and merciless. The sun fell behind the cliffs, painting the world in rust and fire. By the time he reached his cabin, his throat was raw from thirst, and the woman was barely breathing. He carried her inside, laid her on his cot, and lit the lantern. The shadows on the walls looked alive, stretching and curling as he moved. He worked in silence, pulling out the arrow, cleaning the wound with whiskey, bandaging it with strips of linen torn from an old shirt. She twitched and gasped, but never woke. When it was done, he sat back, staring at her face. She looked fragile, almost peaceful now. For a long time, Jacob just listened to the fire crackling, to the wind against the boards, to the heartbeat he wasn't sure was still there. Then he whispered to himself, "Hell with it, Turner. You've gone and done it now." Outside, the coyotes began their lonely songs. Inside, for the first time in years, Jacob Turner didn't feel completely alone, and that thought scared him more than the desert ever had. He poured a shot of whiskey, drank it slow, and glanced once more at the stranger sleeping in his bed. Tomorrow he'd have to decide what to do with her. But tonight he just sat in the flickering light, listening to the breath of a woman the desert hadn't managed to kill. When dawn came, it came slow, the kind of pale, reluctant light that never quite reaches the corners of a man's cabin. Jacob Turner woke before it, as he always did. Years of soldiering had burned that habit into him. He sat at the edge of his cot, rubbing his face, listening to the faint, ragged breathing behind him. The Apache woman was still alive. He turned, squinting through the dim light. Her wound was wrapped tight, but blood had soaked through during the night. Her face looked calmer now, her skin damp with fever sweat. Jacob dipped a cloth into the basin and wiped her brow. Her lips trembled at the touch, and not in fear but pain. He didn't speak. He just worked, quiet and steady, the way a man did when he didn't trust his own reasons. By the time the fire was burning again, the woman stirred. Her eyes blinked open, dark, sharp, and full of confusion. For a moment she didn't seem to know where she was. Then she saw him. Her hand shot toward her side, groping for a weapon that wasn't there. Her breath came fast. She tried to sit up, but pain dragged her back down. "Easy," Jacob said, raising his hand slowly. "Ain't no harm coming to you. Not while you're in my house." She didn't answer. Her gaze darted around the small cabin, the single bed, the wooden table, the half-empty whiskey bottle, the rifle leaning by the door. Her voice, when it came, was hoarse and raw. Why you not leave me?" Jacob hesitated. "Could've," he said. "But I didn't." Her eyes narrowed. "You kill Apache man. You take woman to finish it?" Jacob's jaw tightened. "If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't be talking." They stared at each other for a long time, silence stretching between them like a loaded gun. Then she turned her face away. The fever had left her weak but not broken. There was pride there, the kind that couldn't be killed even by a bullet. Jacob poured water into a tin cup and offered it. She hesitated, then took it with shaking hands. Their fingers brushed for a moment, her skin hot from fever, his cold from the morning air. "What's your name?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. She sipped the water, watching him as if every word was a test. "Nita," she finally said. "Daughter of Grey Elk." Jacob nodded. "I'm Jacob Turner." She studied him. "Turner, white name." "Yeah," he said. "That's what I am." A faint, humorless smile tugged at her lips. "Then why you save Apache woman?" Jacob looked down at his hands, rough, scarred, the same hands that once held rifles over bodies that looked too much like hers. "Maybe I've done enough killing for one lifetime," he said quietly. "Maybe I just wanted to do something else for once." Nita didn't reply. She stared into the fire, her mind somewhere far away. Jacob let her rest. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the boards. The land was waking, the kind of morning that carried both beauty and warning. By noon, she was strong enough to eat. Jacob made stew from dried beans and venison jerky. Though she barely touched it, she ate slow, as if unsure whether she deserved the meal or not. When he looked away, she glanced toward the door, measuring her chances of escape. "You try to run," Jacob said without looking up. "You'll fall before you reach the ridge. You ain't healed yet." Her spoon froze. "You keep me prisoner?" "I keep you alive," he said. That shut her up for a while. The day passed slow. Jacob went outside to chop wood, and every swing of the axe echoed through the valley. When he came back in, Nita was standing by the window, staring at the desert, her shoulders straight, her eyes fierce again. "I saw your people," Jacob said quietly. "Few days back. Smoke rising west of the canyon." She turned fast. "You saw them." "My father. Couldn't tell. Was too far. Looked like a raid gone bad. Soldiers everywhere." Nita's breath caught. She leaned against the wall, her face pale. "They came for us again," she whispered. "They take land, burn homes, kill my brothers." Jacob said nothing. He couldn't. There were no words that could clean that kind of blood. That night she didn't sleep. Neither did he. The fire burned low, throwing long shadows across the room. She sat on the floor by the hearth, arms wrapped around her knees, whispering something in her own tongue. A prayer, maybe. Jacob poured himself a shot of whiskey, but it didn't go down easy. He could feel something changing, something he didn't want. The quiet he'd lived with for so long was cracking, letting old ghosts crawl out. When the fire burned out, he spoke softly, almost to himself. "I don't know why I brought you back, Nita, but I reckon there's a reason." She didn't answer, but he saw the faintest nod in the dark. And for the first time since the war, Jacob Turner didn't feel like he was the only soul lost in the desert. By the third morning, the wound on Nita's side had stopped bleeding. She still winced when she moved, but her strength was returning, slow and stubborn. Like the desert grass that grew through cracks in the stone, Jacob could see it in her eyes. The fever had burned out, and what was left was something sharp, alive. He saddled his horse at sunrise. "I'm riding into town," he said. "Need supplies, more bandages, food. Maybe a doctor if I can find one who don't ask questions." Nita's brow furrowed. "Town?" she said carefully. "White men." Jacob nodded. Her hand went to her bandage. "If they see me." "They won't," he said, cutting her off. "You'll stay inside. Door locked. Window covered." Her voice dropped low. "If they find out, they hang you too." He stopped at the door, one hand on the frame. "I've been hung by worse things, Nita." And with that he was gone. The ride into town took an hour. The settlement was nothing but dust and wood. Half a dozen shops, a saloon and a church that had lost its bell long ago. People greeted Jacob with nods but not smiles. He'd been part of the town once, but years of silence had made him a stranger among them. Inside the general store, the owner, Mr. Greaves, was weighing sugar on a brass scale. "Mornin', Turner," he said without looking up. "Heard you were out hunting. Bring back anything?" Jacob dropped a coin on the counter. "Just hunger," he muttered. "Need some whiskey, clean cloth, and salt." Greaves looked up, one eyebrow raised. "Whiskey I get, but salt and cloth. That for hunting?" Jacob shrugged. "Got a stray dog caught in barbed wire. Trying to patch it up." The old man chuckled. "You patching dogs now? Never thought I'd see the day." Jacob didn't answer. He paid, packed his supplies, and turned to leave. But before he reached the door, he caught the sheriff's voice from the porch outside. "Turner!" Sheriff Dodd was a big man, with a face that always looked sunburned and eyes that didn't miss much. He tipped his hat slow. "Heard you been out near the canyon again." "Yeah," Jacob said flatly. "Hunting?" "Funny thing," Dodd said. "Couple soldiers passed through last night. Said they found signs of Apache camp up that way. Said they're still searching for survivors." Jacob's heartbeat slowed, then sped up again. "That so?" "Mm-hmm. They're mean about it too. Burning brush. Check in every homestead between here and Dry Ridge. If you see any of those savages, you tell me first, you hear?" Jacob met his eyes. "If I see one, I'll handle it." The sheriff smiled thinly. "Sure you will." He waited for Jacob to mount his horse, then added, "You take care out there, Turner. Last thing I need is another man bringing trouble to my town." Jacob didn't answer. He just rode off. The whole way home he could feel the weight of that warning. The army was close. Too close. When he reached the cabin, Nita was standing by the fire, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked stronger now, her eyes alert, her back straight. When she saw the worry on his face, she spoke softly. "They come for us, don't they?" He nodded once. "Soldiers. And the sheriff sniffing around too." Her jaw clenched. "You should let me go." "No," he said. "You'd be dead before you reached the river." She stepped closer. "Then you die because of me." Jacob's voice dropped, rough as gravel. "I've been dead a long time, Nita." For a moment neither spoke. The air between them was heavy, charged with something that wasn't just fear. Something deeper. Then she looked down. "You fight for them once. Now you hide me from them. Why?" Jacob stared at the floor. "Because I know what it feels like to lose everything. War don't care who's right, just takes what it wants." Nita studied him for a long time. Her face softened, and for the first time since he'd found her, she smiled, small, tired, but real. "You have sad eyes, Jacob Turner." He chuckled under his breath. "That's 'cause they've seen too damn much." But before the moment could settle, the sound of hoofbeats shattered the quiet. Both their heads turned toward the window. Dust was rising from the trail. 3 riders. Jacob moved fast. He grabbed his rifle, shoved the whiskey bottle aside, and whispered, "Under the bed now." Nita hesitated, but one look at his face and she obeyed. She crawled under, silent as shadow. Jacob threw a blanket over the cot, then went to the door just as the knock came. Sheriff Dodd stood outside, flanked by 2 soldiers. One of them held a paper map, the other a rifle still warm from the sun. "Mornin', Turner," the sheriff said, smiling like a snake. "Mind if we take a look around?" Jacob leaned on the doorframe. "What for?" "Apache sign," Dodd said. "They say one of 'em's wounded. Could be hiding anywhere. We're checking every place from here to the ridge." Jacob's hand rested on his revolver just out of sight. "You think she's in my cabin?" The sheriff shrugged. Wouldn't be the first time a man's done something foolish for a woman. Jacob's heart pounded, but his voice stayed calm. You can look around. Just don't touch nothing. The sheriff nodded to the soldiers, and they stepped inside. Boots thumped on wooden boards. One of them glanced at the cot, close enough that Jacob could hear Nita's shallow breathing underneath. A bead of sweat rolled down Jacob's neck. Then, as if by grace, the soldier straightened. Nothing here, sir. Dodd smiled again. Guess you're clean, Turner. Good to know some folks still keep their loyalties straight. Jacob forced a nod. Always do. The sheriff tipped his hat and stepped back onto the porch. You take care now, Jacob. Desert's full of ghosts lately. When they were gone, Jacob shut the door, locked it, and leaned against it, breathing hard. From under the bed, Nita whispered, They gone? He exhaled. Yeah, for now. She crawled out, her eyes wide. You lie to them and for me. Jacob looked at her, the firelight flickering between them. Ain't the first lie I've told to stay human. Outside, thunder rolled low across the valley. Storm clouds were coming, but Jacob knew the real storm was already inside his walls. His sky broke open before dusk. Thunder rolled through the valley like the sound of distant drums, and rain began to fall, the first in weeks. Jacob stood on the porch, watching it come down, his hat pulled low. The air smelled of wet dust and pine. Behind him, the fire in the cabin hissed as water leaked through the roof's weak seams. Inside, Nita sat by the hearth, wrapped in one of his old wool blankets. Her wound was healing, though every breath still carried a hint of pain. When lightning flashed, her eyes followed the light, haunted and restless. She looked like a woman waiting for something that would never return. Jacob came back in, shaking the rain from his coat. Roof's leaking again, he muttered. Ain't nothing in this house stays fixed long. Nita smiled faintly. Like you. He looked up at her, surprised by the softness in her tone. For a second, the old soldier in him didn't know how to respond. You calling me broken, ma'am? She shrugged. You fix things that cannot be fixed. That is what broken men do. Jacob chuckled under his breath, but his smile faded fast. Maybe you're right. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain. It filled the world with sound, soft, steady, endless. Jacob poured 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. She took it, her fingers brushing his again. That single touch lingered longer than either wanted to admit. You could still leave, he said quietly. When the storm passes, I can take you to the river. There's a trail that cuts through the canyon. Safer that way. Nita shook her head. Soldiers watch the river. I go there, I die. Then what do you want me to do? She looked into the fire. Nothing. You already gave me life. That is enough. But Jacob didn't believe her. There was more in her eyes. Something unspoken, heavy with memory. He leaned back in his chair. Your people, he said slowly. They the ones the army's hunting? Yes, she whispered. My father, Grey Elk. He fight to keep our land. The white men. They call it theirs now. Jacob stared at the floorboards. Land don't belong to anyone. Just takes turns killing whoever tries to own it. Nita's gaze softened. You talk like one who has buried too many. He didn't answer. He just stared into the fire until the heat stung his eyes. Outside, the wind screamed through the cracks. The cabin groaned like an old ship in a storm. Then over the sound of rain came something else. Faint at first, then clearer. Hoofbeats. Jacob's head snapped up. Riders, he muttered. Stay down. He grabbed his rifle and stepped toward the window. Through the rain, lanterns flickered. 3, maybe 4 horses coming fast. The sheriff again. Damn it, he hissed. They ain't done looking. He turned to Nita. You get behind that trapdoor in the floor, go on. Her eyes widened. What if they find you? I'll talk 'em down, he said. But you don't make a sound. You hear me? She hesitated, then touched his hand once. Light, trembling, but sure. You saved me twice, why? Jacob's throat tightened. 'Cause I can't watch another soul die for no reason. Before he could say more, the knock came, hard, urgent, echoing through the cabin. Turner! Sheriff Dodd's voice boomed. Open up! Jacob took a slow breath, then opened the door. The sheriff stepped inside, soaked to the bone, his eyes glinting beneath the brim of his hat. You got company, Turner, he said, motioning behind him. 2 soldiers entered, dripping mud and suspicion. Evening, Sheriff, Jacob said flatly. You looking to get dry or to accuse me of something again? Both, maybe, Dodd said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Got word from the fort. Apache tracks leading down this way. Fresh ones. Jacob kept his face blank. Ain't seen a soul all week. One of the soldiers started poking around, lifting blankets, opening cupboards, checking behind crates. Jacob's fingers twitched toward his revolver, but he stayed still. Then a sound, faint, muffled. A floorboard creaked. Dodd's head turned. What was that? Jacob forced a laugh. House settles when it rains. Been doing that for years. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer to Jacob. You sure about that? Lightning flashed, white, blinding. In that instant, Jacob saw the glint of a pistol in Dodd's hand. He saw suspicion turning to certainty. And then, before anyone could move, thunder cracked so loud it shook the walls. One of the soldiers cursed, knocking over a chair. Storm's gonna wash us off the mountain, Dodd barked. Let's move. We'll check the ridge at first light. The men turned and left as quickly as they came. Jacob didn't breathe until the sound of hooves faded into the distance. He dropped to his knees, pulled up the loose board, and helped Niter out. Her eyes were wide with fear. They know, she whispered. Not yet, he said. But they will soon. She gripped his arm. You must let me go, Jacob, please. He shook his head. I ain't letting this world take another person who don't deserve it. Their eyes met. Hers full of fire, his full of something he'd buried long ago. The air between them was alive with storm and silence. Finally, Nita whispered, Then we both die. Jacob didn't answer. Outside, the rain fell harder, washing the blood of old wars into the desert. And inside that small, creaking cabin, 2 souls, one white, one Apache, waited for a dawn that might never come. The sun was dipping low over the jagged horizon, casting long shadows across the rugged plains. The cowboy had spent the day tending to his small herd, but his thoughts were elsewhere, on the woman who had gradually begun to trust him, the one whose haunted eyes held memories no words could carry. She had been quiet all day, her fingers tracing the grain of the wooden fence as if it held some invisible comfort. He watched her from a distance, feeling the weight of her silence pressing against his chest. Even after weeks together, she still flinched at sudden movements, startled by sounds that seemed to echo from a past he couldn't fully comprehend. Yet there were moments, rare but precious, when she would smile, a small curve of lips that lit her face in ways the prairie sun never could. Today, he wanted to reach that fragile light. He approached her slowly, careful not to alarm her. You hungry? He asked, his voice rough but gentle. She nodded, still not meeting his eyes. He brought out the small bundle of food he had gathered. Roasted rabbit, wild berries and fresh bread. They ate in silence, the crackling fire the only sound between them. Then as the sky turned a deep orange, she finally spoke, a whisper that seemed to carry 1,000 ghosts. I don't belong anywhere, she said, her voice trembling. My people, my home, it's all gone. Tears glistened in her eyes, and for the first time she let herself crumble. The cowboy felt a pang in his chest, a mix of sorrow and a fierce protective urge. He knelt beside her, careful not to crowd her space. You belong here with me, he said softly. Not because you have to, but because I want you to. Not because of the past, but because of who you are. She shook her head, unsure if she believed him. I've been hurt, abandoned. I don't know if I can... Her words faltered, lost to the wind. He reached out, gently brushing her hair back from her face. You're not alone anymore, he said. Not while I'm here. His voice carried no judgment, only a steadfast promise. Slowly, hesitantly, she let herself lean into him. The barriers she had built around her heart didn't disappear overnight. But for the first time in years, they softened, if only slightly. Night fell, the stars spreading across the sky like scattered silver. Around the fire they sat in silence, the warmth seeping into their bones. The cowboy thought about the hunt that had brought him meat, but instead, it had brought him something far more precious. A wounded soul who, piece by piece, was letting him in. And perhaps, he thought, in some quiet corner of their lives, they could both begin to heal. By dawn, she was still with him, watching as the first light kissed the prairie grass. She didn't speak, but her hand found his, a small gesture that spoke louder than words. The cowboy knew the road ahead would be long, full of uncertainty and pain, but for the first time hope felt tangible. Hope was in her hand, in his, in the shared silence, so in the promise that neither of them would face the world alone again. And as he saddled his horse for the morning chores, he looked back at her and smiled, knowing that the hunt that had begun as a simple quest for meat had turned into something far greater, a journey to mend a fractured heart and, in the process, find a connection that neither time nor tragedy could take away. If you felt this story touch your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional tales from the Old West.